Hey, what's up, guys? So I've been doing a ton of testing over on the beta and Mythic Plus that we had this whole week. If you're over on the stream, you know. It's also been a pretty crazy week for me. We got Partner this week over on Twitch, so be sure to check that out if you're interested. Thank you guys so much for all the support. But just jumping into it, I mainly did as many keys as I could. So as soon as Mythic Plus testing started on Thursday until Saturday, we just tried to do as many possible keys. I tried to play both Hellcaller and Soul Harvester as much as I could. I'll go into both specs a little bit and kind of give my feedback on some stuff. We did get a new adjustments to our talent trees this week, as well as some changes to Soul Harvester. The downside was there was also some nerfs to Soul Harvester that we can go over as well, but essentially they just nerfed like the absolute out of all of the main abilities from Soul Harvester. So its main, like Soul, I have no idea how to say this word, by the way, but it's like Soul Anathema I'm gonna go with. Little note from Editor Arson. Apparently it's Anathema, just putting that out there. That got nerfed by like 50%. Demonic Soul, which is another part of it, also got nerfed by like 50%, I believe. But there's also a lot of bugs that seem to be affecting the spec as a whole. I actually made a post over on the forums. I'm gonna put it in the description, just in like the feedback section for Warlocks, with a bunch of my notes. So you can kind of see, I kind of just tried to go over all of my thoughts and processes and my things about. So the overall spec, I think, is headed in a great direction right now. I think them finally deciding a path between Rapture and Seed is fantastic for this spec. I know it's definitely not the best option for some people. A lot of people still want the UA spinner back from Legion, which I've always said I'm open to if that's a possibility, but I'm glad that they finally just picked a path that they want for the spec. I do think there's a lot of interesting talents that have been added as well, specifically like Relinquished and things like that. I think are a really interesting ability for us. I want Shard Generation to become a thing again, and I think this is a great step towards that. I think them combining Malevolent Visionary and making it something that's a little bit more like Grim Reach mixed with old Malevolent Visionary that's on current retail, so it still does like some AoE damage and things like that. I think it goes a long way to making Dark Glare a lot more impactful of a cooldown. While I still think Dark Glare as a 2-minute is a little lackluster, I think when taking the level of Visionary, it feels significantly better. There was also a nerf to this talent. It now takes, like, you get more critical strike chance from all sources, which I think this talent is nowhere near as good as it used to be, and I think is not worth the 2 points at all anymore, at least in my opinion. I didn't really mention that on the forum post, but not a big deal. I think them making Shadow Bolt an option again is really, really cool. However, on the PTR right now, Drain Soul is currently bugged with the new Cunning Cruelty talent. So whenever you're draining, it will just reset Drain while you're draining. Just to give you an idea, I picked Drain Soul up. I have no other dots on this target right here. I'm not going to do anything other than just hit Drain Soul. You can see I'm just draining. I'm not touching anything. If Drain Soul procs a Cunning Cruelty, it will just automatically keep casting Drain Soul. So it'll just keep casting it over and over again, but it's not proccing any Shadow Ball volleys. So with that said, it's a little hard to test how Drain Soul compares to Shadow Bolt, considering it's not really doing its Shadow Bolt things. I still haven't touched anything, by the way, and this is still going. So this is something that I definitely reported over on there, and I've reported on the beta as well. So I do enjoy that Shadow Bolt is an option again, and I actually really hope that it is competitive with Drain Soul, especially if playing Soul Harvester. I think it just feels a lot better to play around in Mythic Plus. Cunning Cruelty, again, while it's having an issue with Drain Soul, I think is a really cool ability where you just have a chance to proc Shadow Bolt volleys. It feels awesome for Mythic Plus. I hope this stays. I think it's really, really solid for keys for Affliction. Ravenous Afflictions, which is a new talent they added. Basically, you just have a chance to proc Nightfalls off of your Agony, Corruption, or UA. I think this sounds really cool. I think it has a little too low of a proc chance right now. However, if this got adjusted, I think this would be a fantastic talent when playing Soul Harvester, because so many things in Soul Harvester kind of revolve around proccing Nightfalls. And when you do proc a Nightfall, things happen. So, like this talent, for instance, which doesn't seem to be working at all right now, whenever you kill a target, which right now I think you have to be the killing blow, which I hope that gets adjusted. I hope that it's just when a target dies. I think that would be a little bit more interesting, or maybe whenever a target dies, you have a chance, because right now it's you have to get a killing blow and then you have a chance. I think those two are a little too much, but then you have a chance to get a Succulent Shard. And then there's this talent, whenever you consume a Nightfall, it automatically activates this. So ideally, whenever you use a Nightfall, you automatically activate this. So you're just getting more and more Succulent Shards, which is kind of the whole reason this even functions as a spec. It's all built around consuming Succulent Shards, which then proc Soul Themas and all that. However, on the beta right now, this does not seem to be working at all. Like, consuming Nightfalls doesn't really activate this, and Nightfalls in general are having an issue where if you have 2 stacks of Nightfall, then it seems to get the damage modifiers and things. But if you only have 1 stack of Nightfall, it will consume that and still not do anything. And when you use 2 stacks of Nightfall, it will consume both stacks of those. That also seems to be happening with Succulent Souls. So whenever you get a Succulent Soul Shard, or a Sucky Shard, whatever you want to call it, if you have 2, it will, whenever you use that Rapture, it'll consume both of them. That seems to not happen as frequently. The Nightfall thing happens essentially every single time. But the Succulent Soul Shard thing doesn't seem to happen every time. Outside of all of that, which I think that's a huge problem with the spec right now, is it's really hard to feel how the spec feels outside of cooldowns, because none of that Nightfall interaction seems to be working. In Soul Rot, though, Soul Restore feels really cool, and I think this spec could actually be fantastic in Tyrannical, and that's kind of what I talk about a little bit in that forum post. I think going back to like the main things, sorry, I kind of jumped around a little bit there. Oblivion making its way into the tree from PvP talent, I think is really cool. However, on the beta, I haven't really found a great spot for that talent. At least in my rotation, it feels a little awkward. That's not to say that it's bad, it's just whenever I'm playing around, I just felt a little awkward with it. That could just be some growing pains, right? We haven't really had it as part of our kit. But I think that all kind of goes back into a core issue that Affliction still has, in my opinion, on the beta, which is our setup is still just a little bit too bloated with casts. I think removing Siphon Life is a huge step in the right direction. However, I think that when you look at how many casts we still have in our setup for an AoE rotation, or even a single target, it still feels very awkward. I kind of put out an AoE situation here where you have Seed of Corruption first global if you're playing Hellcaller. Let's just assume you are. That's a 1.7 second cast. Then you go into a Violate, another 1.3. Then you go into Haunt, which is like a 90.94. I'm just going to say it's like a second. Then you have UA, which is another 1.3 second. Then you have Soul Rot. Then you have Malevolence, which is an instant cast, right? And then you start dumping Raptures. All of those together, it's like 6-7 seconds, which doesn't sound like a long time, but in a Mythic Plus scenario, if you're having to do a 6-second setup for everything, you know what I mean? I think you could maybe streamline that with reducing some of those cast times, maybe with Violate, maybe with helping seed cast time or something like that. I just think right now it's a little too bloated with cast times when things, like I mentioned a little bit further down, with things like Shadow Crash existing. I think that having something like Violate that costs a shard, has a cast, overwrites curses on mobs that can be slowed because it has Curse of Exhaustion on it, and still doesn't also allow us to easily manage agonies, is a huge problem with the spec right now, and I think would be one of the main pain points other than shard generation that would go a long way in making Affliction feel better. I think the easiest solution would be to increase the duration of agony when applied with Violate. That way Violate stays a 30-second cooldown. It still lines up with every other Violate would line up with Soul Rot. And then because Violate also applies a dot, you're not having to worry about that balancing. Granted, you are extending the duration of agony, but it reduces this game that you have to play where you're trying to catch all these little agonies, which I think is part of the spec, but is in larger pools a little bit of something that shouldn't be like a main part. You should be able to kind of manage 8 agonies in a large pool, and then maybe you're just juggling a couple extra ones if there's some outside. I think that would go a long ways. So I kind of say maybe make Violate instant cast or increase the agony duration. Instant cast Violate I think would make the setup feel better, but I don't know if that's a situation. Kind of talked about shard generation already. They removed a lot of the shard generation nodes that they gave us. So this talent used to have a shard generation component on it where UA had a chance to generate a shard. And then I forget what this one was. I think it was like 1.20 or something like that. They adjusted that number, and then Hellcaller used to have a talent right here that increased Agony's tick rate by like 40%, which made, I think, shard generation kind of through the roof. So I think they've kind of dialed some of that stuff back a little bit, and I hope that they go in and kind of adjust some of those numbers again, especially for Relinquish. I think where it's at in the tree it doesn't really feel impactful in our shard generation right now. At least it didn't feel super impactful to me. I kept playing with it and without it, and honestly, I didn't really notice a huge difference. Like I said, I wasn't playing with Drain Soul at all for the most part. I tried to a couple times and it was kind of laughable. So our shard generation, even without Drain Soul, felt okay. I think it definitely feels a lot better than it does on retail, but that's not saying a whole lot, right? Our retail shard generation is brutal. So I really hope they're going to go back and look at that a little bit. Going into a couple of little things, Soul Swap is entirely gone from our tree now. So I'm a little worried if we ever get into a situation where target swap or any type of hard target swap is a thing. I've talked about this a little bit on stream too, but I think there is a world where we can maybe conserve some like succulent shards or some nightfall procs, or maybe do some things with wither and things like that to help in those windows. However, if a situation like Brackenhide Hollow's last boss does find its way back into the game, where you have this hard damage swap every 15-ish seconds, where you have this really tight window, I don't know what we do in that window. So I hope that that's something maybe they can consider for the spec, maybe bringing Soul Swap back in some sort of incarnation, maybe as a baseline ability. I kind of suggested in the past that Soul Swap be baseline and be similar to Soul Burn, where it has a very low cooldown and it costs a shard. That's fine, but it's something that allows us to easily swap targets for the cost of a soul shard, but helps us in those situations, right? I think that would go a long way with helping the spec in those specific moments. Might be something they may have to adjust for PvP, but I think that'd be something that's really cool. I talk about some of the 2-point talent nodes do feel a little awkward to take right now, specifically like Malediction and Contagion, which are these 2-point nodes here. They kind of feel like just spending points to spend points, which if that's what they want, I just think it doesn't really feel that impactful, especially with the nerf to Malediction. It seems like 2 dead points and another 2 points. And you know what I mean? I think the 2-point nodes are a little awkward. I think it'd be a little bit more interesting if you had some more options to spend points, especially down in this area of the tree. I was finding myself dropping like these 2 talents, which I think improved Malefic Rapture is really cool. Reducing the cast on Rapture is awesome, and then just flying increase in damage is cool. And then they just added this Malefic Touch and kind of been adjusting it, just extra damage on top of Rapture. I think it's pretty fun. But I've been dropping these to try and test and see if maybe we can play with Focus Malignancy or Xavius Gambit, maybe for like maybe drop these 2 on like a Tyrannical week for a little bit more single target or prio damage, right? So I kind of like those options, but they seem a little unattainable in some areas if we have to spend too many points in those 2-point nodes, right? I did have a little issue where Seed of Corruption falls off mobs. There's a clip here. I'll put it in here, but there's a clip where I put a seed out and it just vanishes off a mob. I don't know what happens. I felt like it was happening all weekend, and I kind of felt like I was losing my mind a few times, but we did get a clip of it, and it did happen. So I don't know what happened in that specific situation, but it did happen. So I don't know if that bug is easily repeatable, but there was a few times where I felt like I was losing my mind. Death's Embrace is a talent that they added that's down below. I think this is a talent that came back from Legion, but it's significantly nerfed, right? The damage done by your Agony, Corruption, UA, and Rapture is increased by 5% when a target's below 20%. So it's supposed to be like an execute talent, but this is a capstone talent. It also increases drain life healing by 30% or whatever. That part to me is, it doesn't really matter. I think that part could be completely removed if you wanted to. This is a capstone talent, in my opinion, that you have to spend points through this talent, which now that they removed the shard generation part of it, I don't think is ever worth it. Or you go to Focus Malignancy, which is okay, but I just feel like this talent is far too low for a capstone talent to ever be considered, in my opinion, especially when compared with this talent, which I think is potentially proccing too little, and Malefic Touch, which I think is just more baseline, just helps us in all situations. So if they do want something like Death's Press to say, I would hope that maybe they adjust the numbers on that a little bit. And then I already talked about the Drain Soul bug. So if I dig into Soul Harvester a little bit more, which I kind of already did, a lot of the Nightfall stuff is just not working, which I kind of dug into on here if you want to see my specific breakdowns, but several talents are not working with Soul Harvester, and overall Soul Anthema after the nerfs just feels significantly lacking outside of like our main cooldown, which is Soul Rot if you're playing Soul Harvester, right? With all of that said though, I think Soul Harvester, if those bugs were fixed, even if they kept the nerfs that they are now, I think Soul Harvester, outside of the damage profile, feels really fun to play around. You're just playing her on Soul Rot windows, right? Soul Rot activating all those things. You're playing around Nightfalls, which I think it will be a little bit more engaging, I guess you could say, where, you know, you're proccing things off of Nightfalls, and we have a lot of things that are proccing Nightfalls with this thing, right? So Corruption and Haunt grants Nightfalls. Wait, Corruption deals damage, and then Haunt grants a Nightfall, and then you have like this granting a Nightfall. You just have a lot of Nightfall procs happening, and potentially I think could feel really fun to play around. Also, the animations for this are awesome. Whenever you pop Soul Harvester or whatever, and you Soul Rot, the stuff's pretty cool. Like, honestly, I think I'm stuck in combat or whatever, but the little guy that comes out of your back is pretty cool. I don't know. I think it's awesome. I think the spell animations for that are sick. I do still wish, this isn't really like damage or anything like that, I still kind of wish that that Rapture had some sort of spell effect tied to it. And with Soul Harvester, you do kind of get that. Like, whenever you do this, you know, you kind of have this little guy that pops out of your back, and that dude looks cool. I don't know. It's nothing crazy, but he looks cool. So I kind of mentioned that a little bit, that Soul Harvester, I think, could be a really fun spec for Affliction in maybe like a tyrannical situation. I don't think it necessarily doesn't work in a fortified situation, but I think it might be something that's a little bit stronger in a tyrannical situation, just because it does have all this damage built around Shadow Bolt and Drain Soul, and those kind of lean a little bit more towards a single target playstyle, right? Hellcaller, which I feel like I haven't talked a whole lot about. Hellcaller is a lot of fun. This was the spec that I kind of kept leaning towards the whole weekend, the whole week, I guess you could say, whenever I was doing keys. Not only because Soul Harvester was just a little too buggy and felt very weak outside of cooldowns, but Hellcaller just felt normal in playing Affliction. There wasn't really anything different you were doing. Not that Soul Harvester changes too much either, but Hellcaller is just, you do your normal rotation, and then every minute you pop Malevolence with Soul Harvester, and you have more haste, and it just feels like you're doing a ton of damage in those Rapture windows. And that feels fun. Like, honestly, I feel like playing around Wither and having Malevolence just feels very fun for Affliction. It feels very Affliction-y, if that makes any sense to me. I think Soul Harvester still feels really cool, but I think the bugs are kind of hurting it a little bit too much right now. With that said, I feel like Hateful Rituals, or Hate Fury Rituals, however you want to say it, is a little bit too much like mandatory right now. I think Blackheart Tactics is really interesting, but Rituals plus Unstable Affliction just feel fun to play around. I think Unstable Affliction, Absolute Corruption feels way more interesting to play with Wither, because it just kind of removes one thing that you have to manage. Once you get your Wither out there, don't really have to worry about managing Wither as much. You're maybe watching your Wither stacks, or you're trying to, like, you know, whenever you're getting those higher and higher. But as far as another dot to maintain, Absolute Corruption helps us not really have to worry about that. You could probably still run Absolute Corruption with Soul Harvester as well, but I just felt with Hellcaller, it just kind of all synergized a lot better, and felt it feels like it makes the whole spec play a little bit smoother, in my opinion. It might be a little too strong right now. It might be something you need to adjust, but I think that it just feels way more enjoyable for the spec, and kind of brings down how many things we're managing, especially with the Agony situation and all the little dots that we're dealing with. Overall, I think that the spec feels really, really good, except it's still missing a few things. Kind of like those Vile Taint things that I talked about, and some of those like synergy things. I think that the team seems to be doing a great job in pointing us towards a better direction. I think there's still a lot of work to do, and I hope that we see some more changes for the spec and the tree as a whole. But overall, I think that Affliction is looking like a much better version of itself than it did for like all of Dragonflight, which, I mean, isn't difficult to do if you consider how bad the spec is, or what position the spec has been in for the entire expansion, right? However, I think for the most part, I'm very excited, looking forward. I will continue to be doing a bunch of beta and Mythic Plus stuff on the stream, so if you're interested in that, come by the stream and hang out. Like I said, we got partner this week. Thank you guys so much for all that support. It's something that I never ever thought was attainable, and it's still something that I am truly in awe of. So thank you guys so much for that. So if you're interested in seeing some beta Mythic Plus, I'm still gonna be doing all that. We're still gonna be doing retail Mythic Plus too. I'm still pushing keys over there, so if you want to come hang out and check that stuff out. I will continue to make videos like this if you guys want to see. I was gonna be making a dungeon tips and tricks video for retail keys, but with the season ending so soon and the War Within coming out August 26th, I felt like it was a better use of my time to maybe make a little bit more beta content and talk about what I think the spec needs or what the spec has right now and try and help us go forward. I don't know if anything that I say will ever get changed or if this will have any impact on what's going forward, but at least I know that I said something and I tried to make something better, right? So if you were looking forward to that dungeon tips and tricks video, I'm sorry. It takes me a lot of time to put that thing together and I just didn't have the time to do it. So hopefully the beta content kind of makes up for that, and hopefully we see some great changes for the spec as a whole going forward, and I really hope that Affliction is in a much better spot in the War Within. I think right now, if it were to come out tomorrow, I do think we're in a much better spot. I think Hellcaller alone has put Affliction in a much better spot. Other than all the things I mentioned before, the clunkiness, I think that we are looking significantly better. There's still a few things that I do hope they work on, but we'll see. So hopefully that kind of gives you guys an idea of what my thoughts are about all this. If you want to go cruise over to that forum post, I'll put a link to it in the description. Maybe give your own feedback, reply to this or whatever, talk to them, and let them know how you feel. But I think that's all we can do as a community. Try and do our best to give feedback on what we think the spec needs and what it does good right now and what they've done good and what we don't like. And just, you know, kind of hope for the best, I guess. So thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you in the next one. Be sure to come by the stream and hang out. I appreciate you. Have a good one. Thanks for watching.